with us tonight. A special welcome to you all, and I think a special welcome to Councillor Merryweather, who will be speaking to us later on. I wonder, we have many officers with us tonight. I wonder if we might just run along and make sure that everybody knows who everybody is. Could the officers perhaps just introduce themselves?
Thank you, Chairman. Graham Clark, Strategic Director.
Peter Viggers, Head of Finance and Property.
Rosie Paistow, Accountant Manager.
Candice Keat, Lead Service Accountant.
Annie Wrighton, Strategic Director.
Richard Homewood, Head of Environmental and Regulatory Services.
I'm Andrew Smith, Head of Housing Delivery and Communities.
Good evening, I'm Tom Horwood, Chief Executive.
David Allam, Head of Business Transformation.
Kelvin Mills, Head of Commercial Services.
Robin Taylor, Head of Policy and Governance.
Zach Elwood, Head of Planning and Economic Development.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Item 1 on the agenda are the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 18th of November and have been laid out for 30 minutes before this meeting. May I have, could we accept that they are a true record of that meeting? Is that approved? Okay, thank you very much. I'll sign those later. Apologies for absence. We have 2 apologies from Councillor Mulliner and from Councillor Hegan. Councillor Simon Deere is substituting for Councillor Mulliner, and Councillor Richard Cole, where is he, is substituting for Councillor Hegan. Thank you very much indeed for that. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest?
None prior to the meeting.
Could I just say that we will be considering the Treasury strategy later and the property report, or the Property Investment Board report. I am a member of the Property Investment Board. I will stay in the chair for that, but I will not take part in the conversation regarding the Property Investment Board. I hope that that's okay. Moving on. Questions from the public. Have we received any?
None received, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Let us then move on to the substantive item of business for this evening, which is the consideration of the General Fund budget for 2021 and the medium-term financial plan. And also we have a report from the Budget Strategy Working Group, which is chaired, in fact, by Councillor Mulliner, who is not with us tonight, but that report has been sent to you, and I think that we will take those 2 reports together, and I think that that will make more sense than to trying to do them separately. I'm very conscious also of the fact that item 8 with the service plans has a great deal of relevance to the general fund and the budget, but nevertheless we will take those separately at a later point in the meeting. We have in item 9 the planning appeals performance and costs arising from judicial reviews. Zach Elwood will join us, our new head of planning will join us later as we get towards that item. So let us then go to item 6 and item 7. I'm going to ask Peter Vickers if he would please introduce both of those papers before we then go into open session. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. So agenda items 6 and 7. Agenda item 6 is the administration's draft budget proposals for 2020-21. The executive on the 7th of January asked that the VFM Value for Money Committee scrutinise the draft budget proposals and supported by the Budget Strategy Working Group's work that they've done over the last year. So members' role tonight is to scrutinise the detail within this report and pass comments and observations to the executive. Agenda item 6 consists of the draft medium-term financial plan, the 2021 proposed budget with the supporting schedules, and also the General Fund Capital Programme. So it's quite a weighty document. Agenda item 7 is the Budget Strategy Working Group report on its scrutiny of the medium-term financial plan and also its scrutiny of the 2021 budget. The The medium-term plan budget projections were presented to members in November in a series of seminars and briefings, and the budget strategy working group's been working virtually all last year, on scrutinising the MTFP during the course of that whole year. So their latest comments are included in Agenda Item 7's report. The Budget Strategy Working Group's done quite a valuable job in the work it's done. It's really significant and quite detailed work to date. And therefore, that's the reason why they've been asked to present their scrutiny of the next year's budget. So it does make sense to take the two items together. All the detail covered at the member briefings is included in the budget report. So I'm not really going to be rehearsing that again as I present the budget this evening. The budget round's been particularly challenging this year due to the significant changes in costs and income, as can be seen from the projected 2019-20 medium-term financial plan baseline that we presented in the autumn, and compare that to the latest, which is on page 16. There's quite a significant change, which demonstrates just how challenging a time it's been. These changes are also the result of a number of underlying challenges that have had to be faced, including a new corporate plan, a climate emergency, new emerging budget pressures, and the continued uncertainty in government funding. All of this resulting in the biggest budget deficit to be resolved in a single year at just shy of £2 million. It's quite a significant challenge. The main headline, though, the main headline is that the draft budget presented in this report is a balanced budget. There hasn't been any service reductions or cuts to voluntary sector supports. The detail of how the budget's balanced is on the table on page 22 of the report, supported by Annex 2, which is the General Fund summary front sheet, and Annex 3, which are the supporting detailed schedules that make up those numbers. The draft budget proposes to apply the new homes bonus to mitigate the property investment strategy's void risk until the portfolio reaches a self-sustaining critical mass, and also to provide support to the newly declared climate emergency funding. This is a slight change in strategy from previous years, where the new homes bonus has just been put into a reserve to cover property investment. So that's quite a change, but it's still not using new homes bonus to support services directly. The balanced draft budget comes with some significant risks. They're itemised in the report. These risks reflect way beyond 2021's budget. In fact, they reflect right across the medium-term financial plan. The MTFP is included in Annex 1, so the whole document's in there for you. It details the budget pressures in the medium term with a projected recurrent deficit of about £5.4 million by the time we get to 2023-24. The MTFP sets out a strategy to address this challenge, including an evaluation of the risks and the potential mitigations of those risks, and also presents a set of savings targets illustrated in the report on page 17. This budget report includes 5 draft recommendations from the Executive to the Council on page 25. The Value for Money Committee is asked to consider the report and pass comments, observations to the Executive. I'll just go on to the working group report, agenda item 7, before we go into discussion. The Budget Strategy Working Group consists of a cross-party membership from all 4 O&S committees, working alongside officers. The key focus was to validate the assumptions and the risks included in the MTFP, and also consider all practical options to address the MTFP projected budget shortfall. The working group is undertaking this task with a structured approach consisting of 5 work streams. And therefore this report, which is budget item 7, is the 3rd report from the work they've been undertaking on those work streams. The first report focused on the council's income. Effectively, they are evaluating a level of inherent risk and the potential future change in either direction of those income streams. That was presented sort of mid-year last year. The second report was to the last ONS in November 2019, and the results, and literally reporting on the results of a deep dive into the last 5 years' budgets and financial performance against those budgets, and also all known potential changes and risks in the current MTFP period looking forward to 2023-24. Supporting the Budget Strategy Working Group research, the group commissioned a public consultation, effectively to their work stream 2, if you refer to their documentation, by MEL, a research and public survey company, covering important aspects of the MTFP strategy. The detailed results were reported back early this month to an all-member briefing session by MEL, a consultant from MEL, and they've been briefly summarised in the budget report, just to cover off the key items. The outcome of this this scrutiny is contained. So the outcome of all of this scrutiny is contained within the report. So just walking you through some aspects of that. Section 10 of the report describes the group's findings on the key items of the MTFP. So there's quite a lot of detail there about not just next year's budget, but it's the same theme running right through the 4 years looking forward. Section 11 scrutinises the availability of targets to the achievability of targets to raise property income through the property investment strategy. So there's a fair bit of an analysis of the achievability, potential achievability of that target. Section 12 describes the structural deficit inherent within the general fund, effectively where the annual cost of inflation exceeds the income, the inflation on income by several £100,000 a year. And this links to the importance of the council tax increases, the future implications of council tax increases on the structural deficit, and the implication of the public survey responses, so that those are all linked together. Section 13 discusses a role and the importance of car parking income and the capacity to increase this as the only major controllable income stream effectively within the whole fees and charges realm that we work within. And finally, Section 14 discusses the voluntary grants sector, grants totalling 785,000, and the implications of that on volunteer leverage. The group concludes that any changes should be based upon a review, including the efficiency of the supported organisations and assistance that officers of this council can give towards improving value for money. There is a work group actually underway on that at the moment through the communities ONS. So finally, the executive have shared with the group their full set of options that were available to close the budget gap prior to Christmas. And the report includes comments on those options in quite some detail. However, the Budget Strategy Working Group has had a limited time to scrutinise the executive's final proposals for closing the 2021 budget gap before this report had to be published, and therefore their final comments on the draft proposal were presented to Councillor Martin if you have them to comment on. Otherwise, I've got a set here if it's useful. Chairman, that's as much as I need to say on this.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Merryweather, would you like to add any further comments? And I'll give you, I presume that the officers will reply to questions from members tonight, but at the end of that process, I'll invite you to make any further comment if you wish. But are there any comments that you'd like to make up front?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. That's fine. I'd just like to set some context. Obviously, the budget issues that we face are not news to anybody. They've been flagged since at least 2017, maybe even before when this committee established the Budget Strategy Working Group. We have faced this year a challenge of trying to fill a hole of about £1.8 million, which was pretty much exactly what was predicted all the way back then. And in terms of the financial plan, the medium-term financial plan, this is the first in a 4-year cycle. I hesitate to say this, but this is probably the easiest year of the 4 that we're going to face. And it has been extremely difficult. It's not something that gives anyone pleasure to raise taxes or to suggest raising fees, but it is a situation that we are in. We have no control at all, really, over business rates or how much we get to retain of them. And part of the medium-term financial plan is that we're not going to keep any of them either, and we may actually go into a negative grant. We have very limited control over the council tax element that we can set, which is, of course, a fraction of the overall council tax that our residents actually pay. The only thing that we have some discretion over is the fees and charges, but they're so heavily regulated, really, it's impossible to be commercial about most of those. When we go through the numbers, people, I hope, will note that the largest single remediating factor in the making up of the 1.8 million shortfall are cost efficiency savings that are being made by the team here. And it's taken a tremendous amount of hard work. It is a very important part of the action plan that's being taken. As an accountant, I've learned very, very early on in my career that you can only cut a cost once, and it is the unintended consequence of a cut that will come back to bite you, not the intended consequence of the cut. So we will be listening to the strategy, the feedback from the consultation, and we'll be prioritising income streams over the next 3 or 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, there is one item, there is an update which has been circulated to, it's an update on this item. It's a very small change on page 63. You should have received a memorandum as you came through. It's really not worthy of huge concern. I will ask members of the committee to make comments first. Richard Seaborne has asked to speak. I will give him an opportunity to speak, and then I'll throw it open more generally. I'd appreciate it if we could keep our comments to be relatively short rather than making long speeches. Who would like to start? Mr. Nicholson, thank you.
That's right, that's better. Yeah, the budget for 2020-21 is clearly under pressure. In a budget, there are 3 main elements to consider: costs, revenue, and council tax increase. Well, with costs, some can be precise, i.e. a post-deletion, but others not quite so easy, such as a new computer system. Revenue is a little less likely to be precise. You can produce a reasonable estimate for car park increase, but things like planning fees and possibly overall property income are less so, although there is some provision for this in the budget. And in addition, we have a fully unleashed Brexit in Q4 to add more uncertainty. However, a council tax increase gives a precise figure. The downside is it has to be afforded. If we look historically, the county have also been the largest part of a council tax figure for obvious reasons. And in the past, Waverley were always second with Surrey Police third. But in recent years, Waverley have fallen to third place. So the Waverley element has always been good value and continues to be so. Well, the government over a number of years has put financial pressure on local governments, and this is likely to continue. The council tax figure given without a referendum this year by government for borough and district councils are to be seen, in my view, essentially as a default position. Just as counties are given a 1.99% plus 2% social care, that is their default. I therefore think it would be better to plan for council tax increases in the band D figure option of 2.75%. Now, turning to the report, which I think is very well structured and very concise, I think there are a number of positive things to say. First of all, page 20, 1.16, a decision to scale back council tax discounts for empty properties to be continued. Fully support. Page 20, 1.18. An increase of 2.9% overall in total car park income with a strategy to follow. Very good. And also they earmarked 100,000 to pay for the climate change plan. All good things. Page 21, 1.20, we are going to freeze the waste subscription for a further year to encourage use. This works very well. I've not been to a tip for years. It's excellent. Page 24, 1.38, to continue council tax support. This is very important socially and certainly worthwhile. So to turn finally to the recommendations, and I go through them 1 to 5 as they're written on the paper. I would prefer to see a 2.75% increase in council tax and would like the executive to consider this as an option. But to be precise, I think it's more accurate to call it a reconsideration. Item 2, very much agree to make no change in the tax support scheme. On fees and charges on page 51, I would prefer to see a 5% increase instead of 2% increase to help the planning budget deficit. But I don't know whether this is possible under government rules. If it is, I just hope we can push it to 5%. General fund budget, consider 2.7% increase. And the Annex 6 capital, this is a good comprehensive list of useful projects. Thank you.
Thank you. I think your suggestion in terms of going with the Band D option of 2.75 is a valid one. Members may wish to comment on that as we go through as to which they support. You might also, I think, want to comment on whether 5% or 2% is relevant. Might we just ask officers whether 2% is what we can do, but we could push up 5% if we wished, could we, or not?
So, Chairman, you can go up to a maximum of £5 at Band D,
I
equates...
was on fees and charges, that 2%, most fees and charges are by 2%. Could we go to 5% if we wanted to?
Apologies, Chairman. Yes, anything that's discretionary for the council, you can put them up by more. Planning fees are you can't; they're prescribed by government. That's the core planning fees. So the fees that Waverley charges for pre-application advice and other discretionary services, well, you can put those up as you wish.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker. Jerry, Mr. Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. I remember, it's not so long ago actually, and I'm sure some members of the opposition will remember that, of the Conservative group will remember that when we were in opposition a year or two ago, we were very keen that the administration at that time would consider perhaps following the example of, I think it was East Hants, wasn't it, at the time, that who hadn't put their council tax up. We thought, and we were certainly saying that we certainly shouldn't be increasing our council tax by more than the rate of inflation. And if possible, we should be keeping it as it is. And some residents would even want us to put a council tax down, and I can understand perfectly why they would want us to. So if I'd refer you to page 31, Chairman, at the bottom of page 31, which is the corporate strategy, of which is a reminder in the medium-term financial plan 20 to 24. So the bottom bullet point on page 31 says that we're going to press the government for appropriate funding to meet local needs as needed in our vision for Waverley. Reverse cuts to government funding to enable us to intelligently deal with the looming budget shortfall. The looming budget shortfall is something which has been upon us since 2015, 2016. I think we were first scared with the ideas of negative RSGs and that sort of thing, the revenue support grant. And it's never actually happened. I am very concerned, really, that in budgeting for what is the worst-case scenario, and certainly with Councillor Nicholson's suggestion that I've just heard, which I do have to oppose, I must say myself. I think in the situation that we're in, having made the promises that we've made, effectively the position that we've set out in the corporate strategy, why would we want to roll over and increase council tax, the burden on our council taxpayers and our residents, when, you know, we've said in the past that's the last thing we want to do. We've said in our corporate strategy that's not what we're going to do. We're going to be getting the government to continue to absorb that, as they have. The government have said, I think it's somewhere in our papers here, I read it, that they're not going to be looking at RSG till, I think they said 21, 22, and therefore it wouldn't come into, presumably, until 22, 23 or 23, 24, if it was going to, and they haven't done that as yet. All of the scares that we've got of massive deficit really in here, I won't say all actually, some of it's very real, but the main part of it is our assumptions that the government is going to be nasty like they said they would 4 years ago. And they haven't yet been that nasty. And we've just got a new government that's sort of saying it's not going to be quite so nasty to local governments as the previous leader might have been. So I don't think that we should be doing what we're doing. I'm very pleased, in a way, to see there's only 1.9% increase suggested, because that's not much above inflation. But I saw yesterday in an article that came out somewhere online that inflation is now down to 1.3%, and the government's worried that they might need to try and restoke the economy, and basically we're going into a deflationary period. So I don't think we should be stoking inflation. If I refer you to, let me see, page 36, it says it's the pressures that are on us, Mr. Chairman. Budget pressures in the medium term, on the bottom half of page 36, it says inflation including pay, and gives us an equivalent amount. I think our papers say that there is a staff pay rise being, which I think is an exempt matter presumably, but it's being negotiated in January. And now as we're getting towards the end of January, I'd want to know whether we've got a result or can say anything about that. Because obviously if the question is, the budget pressure, how do we stop inflation outgrowing council tax and parking income increases? Well, we've got to stop stoking it for a start, haven't we? I mean, that's common sense, isn't it? If we're saying that the issue here is how do we stop inflation from outgrowing council tax and the rest, we're the ones stoking inflation. The private sector putting up rates faster than the rate of inflation at the time. I mean, we're leading it. We're the ones growing it. So you know, we've got to do the opposite to what we're doing, actually, if we're going to answer that. That's the answer to that question. And so that's my position. I think we should actually, as opposed to Councillor Nicholson, who's saying that we should be looking at a 2.77 or 2.75, you know, the full £5 increase in the council tax precept. I would say 1.3, 1.4% actually, because that's inflation. If we're lagging what inflation is, which is, you know, about the highest that we should do, then I think to bring another 0.5% off, I think would at least be keeping to what the residents expect of us. They expect change of this council after the elections. If they want us to be doing things the opposite, instead of adding on top of inflation, let's go down with it. Let's go in the direction they wanted us to. Where we can get costs, I've got two questions, if I may finish, please. One of them is in relation to, we're at page 126, 127. I'm looking at how can we pay for this now, Chairman. But, you know, we've got to save money in places. Page 126, 127 is much later in the meeting, but it's the costs of appeals.
Could we come to that when we come to that, please?
Well, not whilst we're talking about this item, no.
Wanting to save money, I understand.
Yep, and the question would be, because we need to know it now before we make our recommendation on this item to the Executive Chairman, otherwise we have to go back in time after coming to this, if you don't mind. Perhaps this should have been before the budget item in the agenda. What's the full cost? This is our fault. We didn't ask in value for money in November, was it October, when we were asking for the scope. We asked what's the cost of legal costs that have been awarded against us in appeals and judicial reviews. And we've got that in front of us. But actually what we really want to know is what's the real cost to us? How much does it cost in admin? You know, in our staff time, all these appeals, because there are very easy ways. Another of the...
Councillor Hyman, I do think that, I understand, they've put a figure of about 120,000, it's equivalent to about 1.25% of council tax. That point is understood, and it's not a budgeted item. So I think we just take note of that at the moment, and we would like to avoid it if we can, but we'll come to that when we come to that in that particular item, if we don't mind.
Well, I'd like to actually. I think we should be discussing these things fully, but because these are things we haven't had a chance to discuss.
Sorry, I'm directing that from the chair. We have it on the for a later item.
Okay, Chairman. I'll let somebody else have a chance, and if nobody does, then I'll say what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whether it's 1.9%, 2%, 2.5% or £5 seems to me a political decision that's been made. That's fine. The administration can say they haven't put up charges by as much as they were allowed to, which is fair enough. It seems to me from an arithmetical point of view that a £5 charge would allow the compounding of that for the future years to come, and it's not something we can carry back at a later date. It's a one-off opportunity, but as I say, that is a political decision, and clearly that's been made. The largest discretionary, or at least adjustable element of borough income, as far as I can see, is car parking. There's about a 2.9% increase being included in this. Now, I mean, car parking charges in Hazelmere are £1 an hour, and I can't see them going up to £1, 2.9 pence as a result. I understand there's a car parking review going on, but it's going to be too late. The results of that are going to be too late to be considered as part of this budget strategy. That seems to me a fundamental difficulty. Car parking is highly sensitive as far as the residents are concerned, highly sensitive as far as the general economy of the area is concerned in terms of shoppers and commuters and all the other things you have to take into account. And that seems to be a fundamental shortfall in the information that we've been provided with here. I don't know whether any officers have any more up-to-date information on car park matters that might provide a bit of background to this, I won't say seemingly arbitrary, but rather strange 2.9% increase. Thank you.
Peter, do you want to comment on that now? Or?
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Just getting our So with the car parking strategy, first of all, the increase of 2.9 isn't a blanket increase across all car parks, so that will be targeted. So where the need is most, so it will be sensitive to the pressures that have just been tabled. The car parking strategy detail, maybe Richard will be able to inform us if there's any more detail on that as yet, is to bring it forward.
Thank you, Chair. We're at the stage now where we have a draft report from the consultants. We're meeting the consultants again tomorrow to go through that, to clarify a number of issues in that. And then we'll be hoping to bring a paper forward in the near future with the long-term strategy for parking, including a long look ahead at parking charging strategy, amongst other issues. But I can't add anything tonight, Chair.
So can I just clarify that? Does that mean that we will not have the conclusion of that, or even any draft recommendations even before we take the budget decision at full council next month?
We may have some indications and some initial proposals before the full council meeting, but I can't guarantee that, Chair.
So that may be, there may be increases beyond 2.9%, or are you saying that the total over the course of the next year will be restricted to a figure of 2.9% or its equivalent thereof during the course of the year?
Obviously, that's for the executive to answer. We will bring forward proposals for a long-term strategy for parking charging, along with long-term proposals for the future use of our car parks and the arrangements for managing them as well.
Could I then clarify whether we have an increase of 2.9% from April the 1st, which will apply for the whole year, or are there some charges to be made or increases to be made during the course of the year, the total of which will be equivalent to 2.9% of car park income?
Chairman, the latter, potentially. I mean, the intention is to digest the car park report and get members to agree on a tariff strategy before the 1st of April, so that we're in time for that. If that isn't possible, then there may be a combination of some charges by the 1st of April and some at a later date. But in terms of the budget estimates, the amount that you see at paragraph 118 of an additional 145 is going into the budget, of which 100 is being allocated. So we've got some flexibility. So if some of that income is not going to generate a full year of income in 2021, well, the 100 that's allocated of that 145 potentially could be delayed in terms of its spending. But the intention is to implement this before the 1st of April so that we get a full year effect on the income.
Okay, I think that's some clarification. Councillor Hyman, I'll come back.
I'm just wondering whether I ought to ask that we defer the rest of this item until we've been through the other items which affect this decision, Chairman, so that we finish this item later. After we get questions answered, particularly in respect of the later items which include what the public said when we spoke to them, and what's in certainly the costs in relation to planning appeals, other things which we don't yet know, which we ought to know before we make our recommendation to the exec. So if we park this one, unless people particularly want to speak before we go on. From what Councillor Deere said, I disagree with what the first thing he said, which was that we've decided on 1.9. We're being asked whether. We're being asked actually that we haven't. It hasn't been decided as far as I'm concerned. We're here to discuss that. Otherwise, we'll go home if we're not here to discuss that. But certainly the issue in car parking is absolutely right. We don't have sufficient information, and I don't know whether we've got enough information to move on with this.
I'm sorry, I disagree. It's perfectly reasonable for the administration to say they're going to add 2.9% extra in from car park income. We can criticise them for not giving us the detail, but putting a budget item equivalent to 2.9% of car park income, I think, is a perfectly reasonable thing to do from a budgeting point of view, even if we don't know the detail of it. I'm perfectly happy to admit that I would be criticising them for not having more detail, but I don't think it's that unreasonable. Peter Nicholson, I'll come to you, Ms. Julia Potts, in a moment. Sorry,
Thank you, Chairman. I was wanting to move away from the immediate budget for the coming year and look a little bit further on to the longer term, well, the medium term for financial forecast. I feel concerned that some of the investments in our investment properties may have an impact on our ability to receive income, which will in fact subsequently increase the shortfalls that we will be expecting in subsequent years. I'm wondering whether the officers have had an opportunity to look at our investment portfolio and revisit their forecasts for the income streams, and in particular from Brightwells, where I feel concerned that the investment returns, looking at both retail income, retail outlets, may not be met. We're mindful of what's happening in the high street these days, and what the income shortfall from our large investment in Brightwells will have in terms of our forecast for the medium term.
Okay, so I think the question is £300,000 of income during the course of the next year a reasonable figure to be putting into the budget?
Indeed.
Yeah. Peter, Graham?
So, Chairman, already we receive about £1.2 million of income from investment properties, some of those historical, some acquired over the last few years. What the medium-term financial plan aims to do is to double that, and then later on the agenda is the property investment strategy, which puts a framework around that. Clearly, that's up for debate, and we've, as Peter highlighted, it is a risk, and lots of other local authorities have gone down this road in a much grander scale than Waverley has or is proposing to. So it is possible to do it. It is possible to do it and keep the proportionality with the core business of Waverley firmly in mind, and that's proposed within the property strategy later on. But there is a risk. We have a property that was been held void for over a year, and we've met that from a provision that we sort of prudently set aside. But that isn't a position that we want to be in. We want to have rental income coming in from our investment properties, and we do from all of the others. In fact, they're very stable, and we do have some diversification across our properties. So, I mean, one thing for debate for members in making comments to the executive is whether £300,000 in next year's budget, and indeed looking at the medium-term target for property income, is appropriate, is achievable, or whether members feel it presents too great a risk going forward. I've put my view down in this report as your 151 officer. I think it is achievable, and I think it is in proportion with the rest of the business. And I think with the property investment strategy and the board managing the governance around that, then we can get there, and we hopefully can exceed that actually, and sort of accelerate that programme. In terms of Brightwells, there's nothing in the budget, in the 2021 budget or in the projections at the moment for income from Brightwells. And members will be aware that Surrey County Council is has an arrangement, has an agreement with Nicholson to take the long-term commercial income from the commercial elements of Brightwells, and Waverley has a 10% stake in that. But at the moment, that is not in next year's budget as an income stream under the investment line or anywhere else. I hope that answers the question, Chairman, but happy to come back.
I was looking a bit further forward other than this year. I appreciate there's nothing going to be coming in this year. I'm looking more in terms of the future 4 years.
Can I suggest we take that in the capital strategy in terms of the longer term when we come to that? Okay, Councillor Potts, and I'll come to Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. I know this has already been covered, but I would like on record my concerns about being asked to agree car parking charges, or potentially being asked to agree a car parking charge increase without any other detail. I have to say on this occasion I concur with Councillor Hyman, and I find it very concerning that something's going to be coming to us potentially in the budget for us to make a decision on without any detail. Find that quite bizarre. Then we'll move on, and I think the area that I would like some additional context and comments on is around the £699,000 of savings that are being presented here and expected from heads of service. I think the most exposed area looking at this, from what I can see, is within the commercial sector at 246,000, with some 68,000 approximately coming from Waverley Training Services. Those who know Waverley Training Services will know what an amazing job they do for many young and underprivileged people within our community. And I'd like to really understand what the true impact, not just cost-wise, but actually to that very heart of our community is there. I'm also concerned to see that we're looking at things like ranger reduction, impacting on our leisure services overall. Again, what is that? Can we drill down a bit more? I'd like some comments there. We're going to renegotiate the Places for People contract. How realistic is it that we're going to get £50,000 saving there, please? I really want to understand how realistic this level of saving is, because it's huge, £699,000 from the budget next year. And I would like to understand, as I say, how realistic is it? Do heads of service really feel that that is achievable? And what is the true cost to the council, please? And I don't just mean cost-wise, as I say, I mean to our residents and the community. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Response, Graham?
Well, Chairman, maybe I can start in general terms and then perhaps ask Kelvin to comment on the specific items from his list. So this was an exercise that we started many months ago, and Management Board asked the heads of service to step up with their detailed budgets in hand and achieve a 5% saving. Now that sounds a bit harsh, but we did at the end of that process go through and assess the impact as a management board with the heads of service of each of these lines. And I can say that I'm confident that we will deliver that savings programme in next year's budget. Now, clearly, and I've said this in the report, we will need to increase our monitoring on a monthly basis, and this is what Rosie and Candice's teams do with the heads of service and the budget managers, because we are taking lines out of the budget here that have helped us stay within budget in previous years. So it will be more difficult, and members can see from the budget papers we have a vacancy target that we budget for, and there are some posts that are currently vacant. There aren't redundancy costs arising from most of these lines here. There are posts that are coming out of the establishment that are currently vacant that heads of service have put forward as part of this savings programme that have previously contributed to the achievement of that vacancy target. So we will need to monitor that very, very closely. And the Overview and Scrutiny Committees receive a quarterly report that comes through. And if members have any concerns throughout the year about the achievability of what will be a very tight budget next year to deliver, then please raise those, and we will discuss those at those Overview and Scrutiny meetings. So I'm confident in putting this savings programme into next year's budget. On the particular point on Waverley Training Service, I won't sort of step into Kelvin's territory too much, other than just to say Kelvin and Adele, who's the manager of Waverley Training Services, came up with a proposal to take a more commercial approach to one aspect of the business and put that to the board, and that was agreed, and on that basis it's gone on the list. Kelvin, maybe you could just add a bit more detail and pick up on the Ranger point as well, could you?
Yeah, thank you, Jem. Yes, with regard to Waverley Training Services, yes, Graham was correct, it's about a commercial approach, but really it's a reflection of a drop in European funding. So there was match funding with regard to our ESFA grant, which is our education grant, that had to be reflected in a change of approach of delivery. So what we've gone through is a full restructure that actually has enabled us to focus much more on our learners, on our teaching, to try and achieve Ofsted Outstanding. So we've gone through a restructure and it's come out positively at the end. With regard to the leisure centre management fee, I'm pleased to be able to sit here to say that has already been negotiated this year and committed to by Places Leisure, where we've realigned the profit share and the management fee directly payable to ourselves, reflecting in the 50,000 increase. With regard to the Ranger service, yes, this is a slight reduction in number of Rangers. However, it has allowed us to create an assistant Ranger post that will take on and support the remaining Rangers to still maintain a good service. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Could I just question you on the reduced European funding? I thought the government had intended to match any European funding, and or even though Europe funds were not being taken away, the government was going to match those, at least in the early years.
All I can say is, with regard to our funding regarding the SFA funding, there was a significant drop because of the European funding being removed.
Who removed it? Are you saying that Europe have already taken that away?
No, Europe did not commit beyond this financial year.
So it's simply come to the end of its term. Okay, that's a little different. It sounded as if the funding was just being taken away. Okay, thank you. Simon, I've got you, but I'm going to come to Mr. Cole, and then I'm going to go to Richard Seaborne, and then I'll come back to you, and then I'll throw it open more widely. So if we can go to Richard Cole.
A very simple one, I think, perhaps on the car parking. The budget, as you indicated, is showing a 2.9% increase in income. Is there any indication from studies you've done previously that to achieve 2.9% would require an increase in the fees above that level? As to say, we might drive the usage down and therefore have to have a fee greater than 2.9% increase, greater than 2.9% to achieve a total income increase.
A quick reply.
Thank you, Chair. There will be some car parking charges that will go up by more than 2.9%, but there'll be others that won't go up as much as 2.9%. And we will be looking to target the increases at the most popular car parks with the highest levels of demand, and not affect those car parks and cause any displacement or reduction in overall use.
Councillor Potts, is this on the... Oh, sorry.
Let's follow up. So you're not expecting the total use to decrease. Is that one of the aims, is maintain the level of use, therefore that the price, whatever price you increase, obviously in average, results in that amount of increase in the fees?
Our experience in the past has been that there is an initial reaction, but then very quickly people come back to their own ways, their own habits, and overall reductions usage doesn't reduce.
Councillor Potts, did you want to come back on this car park question, or use a separate question? Okay. Graham, did you want to come back on this?
Chairman, only to add to Richard's response to Councillor Cole, that there may well be some car park charges that go down, actually, in discussions with executive members, in terms of taking a strategic approach to the usage of the car parks, and indeed helping to influence behaviours of parkers as well. That might well be an outcome when this report is fully digested and then played back through to members.
Right. Councillor Seaborne, you were asked to speak before the meeting, so would you like to make your observations now? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the item I want to cover is actually the general fund capital aspects. If that's premature, given the other things that are being discussed at the moment, I'm quite happy to slip back a little, but if you're ready for it, I'll chip in.
Why don't we take that now? Thank you.
Okay. So there's one big item that's conspicuously absent from the capital bids listed in Annex 6, and that's any mention of the Cranley Leisure Centre. So I can understand why full redevelopment may be a little bit too difficult at this time, but it would be good to have some assurance from officers that at least funding to keep it spluttering along in its fairly unhealthy state is included somewhere in this budget. So that's one item of assurance that would be good, I think. The other point here is the conspicuous absence of projects listed on in Annex 6 from the east of the borough. Earlier in this council year, I raised the point at executive that there's an absence of representation on the executive from the east of the borough, and how was the east going to get a fair shout in deliberations such as budgeting. And here we have a long list of projects, including in future years, cycle plans for Farnham Park, which happens to be the leaders patch, and cycle plans for the Godalming Greenway, which happens to be the deputy leaders patch, and actually both very laudable projects. But then you have to ask, well, what's considerations being given to Dunsfold, which will want cycleways, and certainly the Section 106 money in place for that. Why is that not on the list? So really, I've got three things that I'm interested to hear. Firstly, assurance that funds are included to keep the Cranley Leisure Centre going until maybe a plan can be brought forward at some stage for the full redevelopment. Secondly, something that is included in the final budget papers that set out what the let me step away from that. I can't read my own writing, sorry. I'll jump to point 3. Section 1.41 of the papers talks about a rigorous capital bidding process, and I think it would be very helpful for members who don't sit on the executive or in the Value for Money Committee to have a better instruction as to how to get capital bids in for the year, so that this absence of projects in the east can be addressed by members who don't have their foot in the door. Thank you.
Thank you. Officers, do you want to make a reply? Graham?
Chairman, can I ask Kelvin to just pick up the Cranley Leisure Centre items, and then I'll come back maybe to the Councillor Seaborne's final question about bidding.
Kelvin?
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to maintenance costs for the Cranley Leisure Centre, we have a Leisure Centre client rolling programme, which is detailed on the capital programme, which includes Cranley. We've also got a capital pot from this year, which we've been holding and only doing repairs as and when, which I envisage we'd be able to carry some of that over as well to ensure that Cranley continues to operate.
Thank you. Does that answer the question? Are we looking for a capital refurbishment rather than a maintenance, Richard? The Cranley Leisure Centre, I mean.
It's a very good point. I'm mixing budgets here. I guess the absence of anything for the big Cranley, a big Cranley redevelopment prompted me to thinking, where's the money in general? So actually, you're absolutely right. It's not a capital refurbishment. It is revenue work to keep the place open, and Kelvin's provided that assurance.
Okay, thank you. Graham, on the other points.
So, Chairman, fairly soon, well, later on this month and into February, the SIL Advisory Board will be meeting to agree its first bidding round for SIL funds. That is where I would suggest that infrastructure schemes coming forward, that's the best place for them. There'll be a bidding round that's going to go over the next sort of couple of months, and I think if any members want to talk to officers, particularly in Kelvin's team, around working up infrastructure projects to work with town and parish councils and any other partners as well, actually now's the time to start those conversations, because I think the two that Councillor Seaborne referred to are not funded in this programme. In fact, they're flagged as good schemes, ready for a SIL bid. So I think, by all means, come in and talk to Matt Lang and Kelvin's other colleagues with a view to building up some schemes, even if they're at a fairly early stage of the thinking process for year 2 SIL, year 3 SIL. We want to see those bids coming in now. So that should all be finalised in the next few weeks, Chairman, and a bidding round will be kicked off. There's one in draft and the portfolio holder's looking at it, and the SIL board will be meeting in the next few weeks to finalise that.
Thank you. Councillor Potts, I think Councillor Dear, you asked, so I'll take 2 quick points from you if I may. I'll take them together and then I'll open it up more widely. So,
Yes, a point of clarification, if I may, please, Chairman. Probably I've missed it, but I have spent quite a lot of time going through this report. Page 22, the table on page 22 of our main report, refers to other minor changes, net saving £227,000. Can someone help me understand what that is? Thank you.
Councillor Dear.
Thank you, Chairman. A bit disjointed, but I was going back to the 699,000 of savings that the heads of services are expected to provide. That seems to be an eye-watering amount of money. We can only draw the conclusion that there's either an awful lot of money being spent on things that to no effect, or services are going to suffer as a result. I mean, I don't know which. That level of saving, I mean, has sort of been referred to, it must involve the reduction in numbers. I haven't seen anywhere, as far as I can see on these papers, that any redundancy costs are included as part of that process. Is that correct, or is it a matter of natural wastage and people will just not be replaced as they leave? Thank you.
Thank you. Officers, 227,000 and redundancy in the challenge of the 699.
Chairman, so on the 227,000, the biggest numbers in there are recycling income from the garden waste. There's we talked earlier about keeping the figure at the same, keeping the charge at the same. So more than half, about 120,000, that 227 is extra income coming from garden waste increase in numbers. And there are various other lease renewals on some of our properties, and some savings in back office costs around postage and advertising as well. Chairman, that sort of come to that 227. We can circulate a full list after the meeting if members wish.
It's a fairly substantial number. I think members would probably appreciate if that could be circulated. Thank you.
Of course,
yes.
yeah. And
okay.
Chairman, on the other point, on the redundancies front, this is in relation, can I just check, Chairman, this is in relation to the overall savings programme or the £700,000?
The comment was within the heads of service reductions.
Yes,
there must be, there are reductions in posts, and presumably, therefore, redundancy costs will be required.
So most of those posts are actually vacant, so they won't. There was one instance where there were redundancies, and Kelvin referred to it earlier, which is the Waverley Training Services, and those redundancy costs have been picked up in this year from other staff savings. So I don't anticipate any further savings or redundancies from that particular item, the Waverley Training Service, in next year's budget.
Thank you. Members who are here, not members of the committee, but members generally, are there any thoughts or observations that you want to make? Councillor Beeman, as a member of the executive, I'll allow you to say something, but...
Well, just a point I would like to make is that last year, when I was in your position as chair of the Overview Scrutiny Committee for Value for Money and Customer Service, I used the term, when you presented the balanced budget, yes, indeed. You know, I said it was the calm before the storm. Well, the sea's getting a bit rougher and the storm's still coming, I'm afraid. And I think the biggest thing of all, which is something which you can all unite in, is the fact of retained business rates, in fact. Of £38 million that this authority collects, only £2 million is retained by Waverley. And in fact, we're now budgeting for even lower levels of that level being retained. It's difficult to believe. It's amazing that I think we ought to campaign. I think we should all agree to campaign collectively and strongly to retain the level of the existing business, not just this derisory amount, in the review of business rates that's taking place, which is deferred for a year. Because unless we can do that, I think, we're going to face businesses, you're going to tell businesses that all their business rates are not spent in Waverley, and we're going to put up car park charges as well. It seems an amazing argument to me. Anyway, I'm just making the point that I think the elephant in the room is retained business rates, and I think we should collectively, as a group, as it were, campaign for at least the retention of what we have now.
Thank you. Well, I guess we could urge the executive to urge the LGA to take that up in a stronger and more effective way, perhaps. Where have I got to? Councillor Elson.
Thank you, Chairman. I am very concerned about a couple of elements in particular in this budget, and like my colleague here, I'd like some reassurance. First thing that worries me a bit is in planning, which comes under one of the ONSs I sit on, and that is that there is an intention to increase planning application fees. Now, that's all very well, but can we be assured that our planning department are going to be able to give the upgraded service that they are actually going to need to be giving if you're going to be charging more? And that is quite labour intensive, I think. It's quite a lengthy process. It needs a lot of investment. So that's just one thing that I'd like some assurance on. And the other thing is Careline. I understand you're going to diminish the support that the Careline service receives. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I can see Kelvin frowning over there. But I understood that the level of support that's offered to Careline is going to be diminished in some way, maybe number of visits, I'm not sure. And yet the charges are going to be increased by, I think it's £2 a week. Again, if I'm not right, you'll tell me. That's another possible income stream. Not a huge one, but it can be developed. And I just wonder, if we are lessening the service and increasing the charge, is the take-up going to be diminished? And we need to be thinking about this, and we need to be really entrepreneurial about these sorts of income streams, which may seem not very big, but they are important, and they're important to our residents. Thank you.
Who wants to make reply, Kelvin, or is it Zach for planning? Or
I'll go first, Chairman. With regard to Careline, no, there's not any drop in service projected for the coming year. The only saving made was a reduction in hours request by one of the members of staff, but that was more than compensated by the fact we'd increased a full-time post and created another full-time post. But no, please be assured that we are not looking to reduce services. Yes, there is an increase, but there has been no increase for the last 4 years in Careline, and it's been looked to be kept to a minimum. So we're not expecting any impact on our customers.
Zach, your question really perhaps is more as a planning environment committee, but do you want to reply on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. As Graham pointed out earlier, planning application fees are set nationally, although they have recently gone through a 20% uplift. And in planning, certainly, we believe there is scope to increase planning pre-application fees, but only subsequent to making sure that the performance and basically the service that people get for that fee is commensurate with what they're paying. So I think Councillor Else is absolutely right. Performance is very key to me as a new head of service, and ensuring that we provide good customer service and improve our response times in terms of pre-applications and planning applications. So yes, it is a challenge, but certainly I think there is scope to increase pre-application fees. But we need to make sure that officers are minded of the fact that people are paying a premium for that service and deserve that customer service. So it's a fair point.
Jenny, you want to come back?
I just want to say I made a mistake. I meant pre-application, not planning application. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Well, I think you've answered the question. Zach, it's a pleasure to have you with us for the first time, so welcome aboard and good luck in your new job. Any other thoughts or comments from other members, non-committee members? Okay, sorry, yes.
It's Councillor Ruth Reid.
Ruth, sorry, yes.
Thank you, Chair. As I'm on the Climate Change Advisory Group, I'd like perhaps someone to tell me how they've taken climate change into consideration when setting the budget in particular areas, please.
Thank you. Who wants to reply? Graham?
Chairman, again, maybe I'll start. So when the budget was pulled together, members and officers are very mindful of the climate change emergency and the new corporate plan objective of carbon neutrality. And so there's an emerging climate change action plan that's being worked up by officers and a member working group. Now, all the detail isn't out at the moment. So in advance of that coming out, this budget includes a contribution from New Homes bonus of £200,000 and a £100,000 earmarked from the additional car park income as well. So that's where members felt would be a starting point to supporting financially the new commitments on that corporate plan objective. Clearly that will need to be reviewed when the plan emerges with the detail on it and over the coming years, and it may well be that later this year we need to review the medium-term financial plan with that in mind, and it might be that set aside of funds is too much or too little or about right, and we just don't know at the moment, but members felt that it was about right for what we know about the emerging action plan at this stage.
Okay, any other comments on that? Okay, thank you. Councillor Coburn.
I think Councillor Reid has just sort of highlighted what I've been sitting here worried about. I haven't really got anything terribly new to say. I think I follow everybody's uncertainty as to why we're doing certain things, why we've plucked out 1.9, why we've decided that we think we know what's going to happen in a car park review of which we haven't got the results. We've got climate change. I'm always wary when I'm setting a budget that things never get cheaper, ever. And I know we can't just up fees and charges and taxes at will, but when we're looking realistically at what this council is going to have to do over the next 3-4 years, we have to, when we're setting this year's budget, think ahead. We can't possibly just tick the box for this year because, you know, as I say, we then have the same problem next year. So I actually think At the moment, there's too many unknowns. But I think to err on the side of increasing, I'm going right back really to Councillor Nicholson at the beginning and supporting, you know, his figures. I feel are much more realistic for a budget that does its trick this year, but actually doesn't put us at a great disadvantage next year and the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the only comment I would make from the chair is that this is the first year of a 4-year plan. My concern is whether it's sufficiently robust this year in order to safeguard us in years 2, 3 and 4. There do seem to be an awful lot of uncertainties. Climate change is one, car park income is another, government restrictions, business rates and so on and so forth. There are lots of uncertainties, but I guess it's always so. Chief Executive, you wanted to say, make some reply.
Chair, thank you very much. I think Councillor Coburn is spot on there in terms of her use of the word uncertainty. There is a great deal of uncertainty facing us. One of the main areas of uncertainty, as many of the councillors have indicated, is around where government policy is coming from. One of the areas of certainty is where government policy has been, and that's illustrated in the graph on page 19, where you see that over the last decade, government funding has reduced from £6 million per year to £3 million per year to this council. And you see over the next 3 years, we're expecting the remaining 3 million to go. So harder cuts from government and faster. So albeit there are some uncertainties about the future, the government, for example, has said that they will conduct their fair funding review within the next 12 months. But there's also mood music, and certainly councils in the south are concerned about what levelling might mean, the phrase that's now come into national political discussion. So we can see that where we've come from, we've saved quite a bit over the years without a detrimental impact on service by and large. We can see that the demand on us is going to be more and faster. And that means that during the life of this political term, before the next election, we will be coming to you, no doubt, with other proposals, other discussions, and seeking direction and ideas on what to do beyond. So Councillor Merryweather, right at the start, referred to actually, in some respects, as challenging as this budget is, it's the next period that is more challenging. The Institute of Fiscal Studies published a report at the end of last year, and it noted that councils in England have saved £1 in 6 over the last decade, and obviously Waverley would be part of that. But it doesn't sound a great note of optimism for the coming few years. So we will have to look differently beyond this financial period, beyond this initial budget. Some of you have talked about lobbying government. That's absolutely the case. And we will be meeting with our 2 newly elected MPs separately over the next month or so and be putting the case to them. We'll certainly be working with the Local Government Association and also with South East Councils, which is another umbrella group focusing in particular on the South East, which is very concerned about any potential diminution of investment in the South East, which could actually impact the whole of the UK. So there's a lot more to be done. We're also, you can see in the budget, accelerating our property investment strategy. There's further discussion on that later on, and we're relying on that to balance future years' budgets as well. We have a business transformation project, which is looking at streamlining our customer approach, encouraging digital services and self-service to the many people who can, so that we can also focus on the vulnerable who can't. And we should be looking further. And then finally, I look around, and at this time of year, lots of councils, all councils are actually publishing their budgets and drafts and having discussions in similar meetings as this, and they're all in the same boat. So there must be a discussion really between us about how does that work? How can we work more collaboratively across the public services, particularly in Surrey, where, if we're honest, it's been piecemeal and could well be advanced further. So all of these are for discussion with you over the next year, and I look forward to having that debate, because there are going to be some quite serious debates to have, so that we can continue to provide the services, the quality services that our residents need, want and value. Thank you.
Thank you. What I want to do now is just to go to Councillor Merryweather, and then I'm going to seek the views of the committee as to whether they favour the 1.9 or 1.99% increase, or whether they would prefer to go to a 2.75% increase, or whether they would prefer to cut down to a 1.3 or something in line with recent inflation. So I will seek the views. We may well go to a vote on that. But before I get to that, I wonder if Councillor Merryweather would just like to wind up and offer some brief thoughts from his perspective of what we've said.
Yeah, brief. Right. Well, we, in no particular order, to come back to come to Jerry Hyman's comments to start with. Well, there are various measures of inflation: consumer price index, retail price index, and then the actual inflation that we experience here, which is higher than CPI. The problem that we have, as much as I like to present a balanced budget, and it is consistent with our priority to sustain a financially sound council, we don't actually have much choice. We do not have reserves to run a deficit budget. So I have to present a balanced budget. I'd like to anyway, but I don't have much choice. If I can just deal with some of the specifics. On the council tax, you will not be surprised that there was some very frank and healthy discussion about where we should end up on that. And that there were those who were reluctantly prepared to go for the £5, which is the absolute maximum that we could. And there were others who felt that 0% would be appropriate. But we have to balance the budget, and we don't have a great deal of ammunition to play with. The one thing that I would say is that perhaps the only benefit some of our residents can see from all of the development that's going on in the borough is that the council tax base is increasing. And I, for one, don't mind giving our existing council tax payers a bit of a break on the £5 because I'm able to, because all of the new people moving into the borough have started paying council tax, and those numbers are on the chart that you have in here. As far as car parking is concerned, car parking hasn't gone up at least since 2017, in some cases, even before. We have the lowest car parking charges in the area. We don't charge in the weekends. We don't charge on at night times compared to places like Guildford. We're cheap, but our prices have not gone up since 2017. Our costs have, our inflation is going up, and frankly, it's not fair, for example, that our council taxpayers who can't or won't or choose not to drive should subsidise a free pass on the car parks. It's very clear in the report that our ambition is not a blanket increase of 2.9% in car parking charges. It's a shame, frankly, that the car parking review isn't ready. But from the raw data that we've got, it seems pretty clear to me that pricing, frankly, is not the priority for the people who use our car parks. Our car parks are absolutely jammed in the town centres, and people want car park spaces to be available when they get there. And if we would put up the charges by 5 or 10p and say to them, yes, you've got a better chance of getting a car park for that 10p, they'd bite your arm off. The issue is we have three types of parker. We have, if you want to call them leisure parkers, if you can call shopping that, we have workers who need car parking spaces, and we have commuters who use car parking spaces. And if you look at the car parks we have town centre car parks, we have satellite car parks, and we have car parks that are near railway stations. And the idea of the 2.9% is to give us a yield increase while being much smarter and much more flexible about who we charge and where we charge them. We have 4 car parks where we don't charge people at all. And in some places, if you go to Way Hill, for example, you'll find them occupied by commuters who take out their bikes and cycle down to the railway station. Is that fair on the residents in Way Hill? No. So we need to deal with that. We need to nudge behaviours. If you go to Farnham, you'll see 2 car parks there, Riverside 2 and 3, which are empty. Should we be charging anything there? Should we be reducing the charges so that people who work in Farnham town centre choose to use those car parks and free up spaces in the town centre? So it would be laughably easy to put the prices up by 5% or 10%. So easy and fair, bearing in mind they haven't gone up for the last 3 or 4 years. Is that the smart thing to do? No. So I'm sorry that we don't have the answer for you right here, right now, but the answer is that all of the feedback that I've seen so far is that 2.9% is achievable. In fact, 2.9% is achievable just by jacking up the penalty charge notices by 50%. Done. That's all you'd have to do. Or do a bit of advertising, something like that. So we're looking at all sorts of things.
So Mark, could you speed on, you think?
Yeah, sure. There were several other questions. We were talking about fees and charges. Fees and charges in particular are going to be reviewed, particularly, for example, for pre-planning advice. It's not fair that a resident looking to put something up in their garden should be paying the same rack rate as a developer looking to do a small development. So all of those things are up there for review. I think in a nutshell, the answers aren't simple, and I'm not going to pretend that they are. Thank you.
So members, if we turn to page 25 and item 2, the draft recommendations, I think the first point that I'd like to get some clarification on is whether we agree with the 1.9% increase. Can I suggest that, can we first of all just have a show of hands for those who would either prefer to stick with the 1.9%, we'll deal with 2.75 in a moment, but would you either stick with the 1.9% or go to something lower, 0 or in line with inflation, bearing in mind that if we were to do that, then there would be a whole recalculation of the budget because you'd have to find other savings in order to balance the budget. We can't go out with a balanced budget. So can I have a show of hands as to those who would prefer to go lower than the 1.9% that the executive are proposing at the moment? So committee members only. So just one hand.
No, sorry, Chairman. I just thought that if members are voting on the capability, our capability of reducing the increase from 1.9 to say 1.4 or whatever to the minimum we can make, that's along with the sort of current inflation rate, then we would need to be able to debate the issues or at least consider in some form where some extra money to cover that would come from. And I was going to suggest that, but we're not allowed to talk about it. So what's the point in having a vote if we can't justify that resolution? I
suspect the committee does not want to go lower than the figure that's proposed. But just can we have a show of hands those who want to go lower? And I think that's only you, Jerry. So I think that falls. So now if we can shift to whether we would prefer to keep the 1.9% as proposed, or whether we would propose or whether we prefer to go to the higher figure that's permitted by government, which is going to a £5 for Band D increase, which amounts to a 2.75% increase. Could I have a show of hands, those who would like to go higher to the 2.75%? How many of the members would prefer to do that?
Can we ask a question before that, Chair?
Yes.
Well, if we went to the higher, would it mean that car parking charges wouldn't have to be racked up?
That's a different debate because you could then you could either put it in the coffers, you could have fewer cost savings. I mean, there are all sorts of things that could happen. I think we can go too far on this. I think would we prefer I think the point is if you go with a higher figure now, then that's the compound effect of that over the next 4 years means this is Mr. Nicholson's point that the compound effect of that is beneficial over the 4 years. I think it's a principle thing rather than try to get into the detail. So can I have a show of hands those who'd prefer to go with a higher figure up perhaps to the 2.75%? We have one person there. So I think the mood of the committee...
Mr. Chair.
Sorry?
It's me. I just wondered if it would be helpful for everybody to actually understand what that means in pound terms, what a 2.75, a £5 difference.
Are you going to... Sorry, are you going to tell us?
Well, only if anyone would find it interesting. I think it's about £45,000 or something like that off the top of my head.
Around about £100,000 per 1% or ish, isn't it?
Yeah, to go to £5 as opposed to 1.9, it'd be another 80,000 in the budget.
80,000, there we go.
Okay, but I think the mood of the committee is that we would go with the committee says leave it at 1.9%. Item 2 is to agree to make no change to the council's existing council tax support scheme. I haven't heard any debate on that. I presume that we're all happy to do that.
I'd just like to object to this form of uninformed decision-making, honestly, without some answers and without covering some of the issues that are going to arise later in this in tonight's meeting. I really don't think that that any of the members here are in a position to consider what they want. I would say I think it's 2.77 instead of 2.75 if we're going to get it right, but officers might want to confirm that.
I think you've made that point earlier. I've noted that, and we'll note that in the minutes.
I mean, why can't we do this properly?
Thank you. So I think members are inclined to go with no change as is proposed there. Are we agreed? Okay, item 3, to agree the proposed fees and charges as shown in Annex 4. There was some concern about whether we should go higher rather than stay in line with the inflation, which is the general figure of 2%. There are several places like bins going up 25% in other places, but 2% is the norm. You want to come in?
Sorry, Chairman, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that Careline, that there was a supplement on Careline, and it's only going up to £4.50 a week. It's not going up to, whatever the report said, £4.90 or something. £2 probably a month. Yep. Sorry, I'm thinking in weekly terms. Yeah, it's £4.50 a week, which is second lowest in our network compared to Spelthorne.
Okay, so I think would the mood be to probably accept the 2% in general rather than go to a higher figure of 5%? Would that be what the committee would prefer to do? I'll take silence as yes. All right. In terms of the next 2 items, I don't think it's the role of this committee to approve a budget. I think I'm not going to ask that you approve the general fund budget or to approve the general fund capital programme. We will note it. We have made a number of observations during the course of this meeting. I have no doubt that officers will record those observations. I think it's worth making note of our doubts as to the lack of detail concerning car park increases. We've discussed and we've noted the risks associated with an additional £300,000 for property income. We have got some considerable concerns over the doability of the 699,000 savings. This isn't universal of all members, but these are points that have been made, and in particular the commercial services. Are there any other particular points? I think retained business rates was expressed as a concern, which I think perhaps we could leave. I think the general concern as to whether the climate change budget is going to be sufficient, and I think officers will doubtless add extra valid points to our concerns. If we went along with that we are noting the general fund budget and noting the capital programme, and we will put in some additional comments. Is that acceptable to the committee? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let us then move on to our next item, which is item 8, which is the 3-year rolling plans, the service plans. So could I invite the various officers present to present on that? Or we're going to start with Yasmin. Louise Norrie is not with us tonight, but Yasmin will make an introduction, then I'll ask officers to add their comments. So, Yasmin.
Thank you, Chairman. As you say, Louise Norrie isn't with us this evening, so I'll be taking any comments from the committee back to her when she gets back. So service plans set out the forthcoming years for the council services. They were written informed by the budget shortfall challenges and the climate emergency objectives. I'd like to encourage members who attended the ONS training to think about the work programming that we discussed and use these service plans as inspiration for possible work programme items for the committee's future work programme. And then the information on what the council will be working on over the next few years. So that's a very brief introduction from me, and I hand over to the heads of service who will take you through the headlines of their service plans. Thank you, Chairman.
Take the business transformation service plan first. David, do you want to address that?
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. This is a kind of refresh of last year's service plan. Members will notice that it's characterised by quite a lot of business as usual information, which you don't necessarily get in all kind of service plans, but that's why there is quite a lot of operational detail in there. The main changes that I'd draw the committee's attention to are some additions around the climate change, which you won't be surprised to see in there, and also significantly the business transformation outcomes, which are from outcome 15 onwards, which are a reflection of the changes that were made earlier this year. I won't add any more detail other than that. Thank you, Chair.
Any comments to David on that from members of the committee? No comments? Jerry?
Only great. Yes, it's obviously a necessary thing, and I think everybody fully supports it. We have to have a business transformation programme, and we want to help it in any way that we can. And we want it to transform the council. I mean, people voted for change, so yeah, more power to it.
Any other comments? Jerome?
Mindful that this is going to be a substantial saving over the next year, I would ask that we put particular attention on reviewing the progress of the transformation plan over the coming year.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely vital. I mean, the business transformation is the key to what we're doing over the next 4 years. There's little to be able to criticise here. I think but we need to carefully monitor the thing as it goes forward. I think that's a perfectly reasonable point. Okay, then let us move on to Peter, the Finance and Property Service Plan.
Thank you, Chairman. As Head of Finance and Property, my remit includes the Housing Benefit Service, which administers housing rent benefit to claimants, council tax and business rate collection, so that's the billing and collection of council taxes, maximising the council tax base, financial services incorporating financial management, treasury management, and the council's financial administration of its transactional services, all the infrastructure that sits around that with the IT. Asset management team, so it's managing the council's interest in a wide variety of property and land assets and investing in new property under the property investment strategy. So that's the remit. It's quite a wide remit in some senses. My service's top priority is the direct delivery of the medium-term financial plan property target, which is over 1.2 million over the next 4 years. And that's working really closely with the Property Investment Board to bring proposals forward, potential investment proposals forward. And also a top priority is also supporting the delivery of the transformation target, which David's already referred to, through integrating the revenues and benefits service, first of all, together into one service. They have historically been two separate services, but there's a lot of synergy and efficiency being gained through merging the two. They're both frontline services, so they're really important services. They affect virtually every person in the borough in many ways. And that team then combined team needs preparing to move them into the integrated customer service centre later on. So there's quite a big bit of project work going on there within the team itself. The finance team has an important role to play as well. It's not just a back office service as such. It's got a role in terms of supporting these services to stay on budget, as we referred to earlier in the budget debate. That's a really key role that they have to play there, particularly this coming year. And supporting the projects that are underway within transformation, so and also the climate change. So there's quite a bit of work they're involved in right across the organisation. The finance team also are reviewing and upgrading the financial processes and systems that we use to deliver our transactional administration, financial administration. And by embracing new developments in IT capability and also enhancing security and delivery efficiencies. So we heard a little bit about that when we were talking about Careline, and Kelvin was getting engaged in that. We've brought in a new transactional process that actually drives quite a bit of efficiency in that area. And more of that will come through the next year with our Adelante cash receipting system and our BACS processing.
Comments, questions from the committee? Mr. Hyman.
Very quickly, only that, I mean, if you look in the right-hand column, and I'll give you an example, page 94, where we're talking about the balanced general fund budget, and generally it says decisions are to be taken in line with the medium-term financial plan. I think, as I've already said before, where we've set out what our corporate strategy is, actually we've got to make sure that all of these things align. It is important the medium-term financial plan that we are sticking with actually aligns with the corporate strategy. Thanks.
Thank you. The only point that I would make is that if we go to page 95, F712, F71, F72, F73, my only concern is whether we have, whether we are going to be able to get the staff and the qualified staff in order to get to push this through, particularly in the property investment areas and some of the climate change areas. There are some very considerable challenges. And I'd just like an assurance that we will be looking for the right level of staff in order to do the job.
Chairman, if I just respond to that. The team's fairly well resourced as it stands. We have a further vacancy within the team which we are currently recruiting to. The job closed today. We have some strong applications for that. So we're in a good position to make sure, at least internally, we are geared up. We're also working externally with consultants around property consultants in order to source properties for the investments.
You mentioned increased use of IT systems and new packages. Can I ask, are they all supported internally, or are these running in the cloud with the support provided elsewhere? I mean, indeed, has there been a trade-off as to whether it's best to have people in-house support them or for it to be done remotely?
So the systems we have already are in-house, apart from one system we're going out to, which is our purchase invoicing process scanning, will be going out to a company in the next 2 months, which will bring quite an enhanced efficiency for us in terms of the handling of the paper chase involved in handling invoices. All of our systems are progressively going to the cloud, so our main accounting system currently is in-house on our servers, but the point in time will come in the next couple of years when we will have to go to the cloud, because that's the way it's going in further upgrades, and that will end up being on a managed service. We will always have in-house application analysts to support the systems that we use, and that's just a nature of having those kind of systems. We need people that actually understand the databases and how to manipulate the data within them to do reporting and make sure that the checks and the balances are correct in the systems.
Let's then move on to policy and governance. Robin Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. The service is comprised of 6 functions: democratic, legal, human resources, corporate policy, communications and engagement, and elections. Service plan outcomes 1 to 5 relate to corporate policy. The first one being monitoring and managing performance, coordinating that within the organisation to help the organisation deliver on its corporate strategy. That team will continue to provide policy support to all of the overview and scrutiny committees, including this one, and also coordinate the Council's corporate complaints function. A key project for the team within the time of the plan is to support the Local Government Boundary Commission's review of the Council. Service Plan Outcome 6 relates to the communications and engagement function. You'll recall that the Council only very recently agreed a new corporate comms and engagement strategy, and what you see in this service plan replicates in summary the content of that strategy. Outcomes 7 to 10 relate to democratic services, including the monitoring officer function. Obviously, they have core work to do supporting the democratic decision-making by councillors and also supporting high levels of conduct and standards. Beyond that, there are a couple of priorities. One is the piece of work that's already started to comprehensively review the council's governance arrangements. That's underway already. The second is a commitment under outcome 10 to make the transition to committee papers being distributed and accessed electronically rather than by paper, something we already do to a certain degree, but mindful of the need to bridge a budget gap and also the climate emergency that's been declared. There's sort of a new push on this, but I would make 2 points. One is that you'll see there's a key work stream to identify and resolve any technical barriers in terms of use of devices, making sure that everybody can access those papers. The second is that it would be put to full council before making that decision, and that any accessibility issues will be picked up as part of the equality review. Outcomes 11 to 13 relate to the elections team. Significant business as usual activities to maintain the electoral register and prepare for and run different types of elections and polls, but also building on the door-to-door canvassing pilot by going 100% paperless. Outcomes 14 to 17 relate to human resources team, and again, they relate directly to the strategy not so long agreed. So that's providing solid foundations for the team in terms of its processes, policies and procedures, with the theme of that being moved to digital rather than paper-based systems, and also increasing staff and manager self-service. Beyond that, the focus is on recruiting, retaining and skilling up key members of staff, streamlining processes, ensuring our pay and reward structures are appropriate, and promoting positive mental health and well-being in the workplace, and finally, developing and delivering a robust programme of learning and development. Final section of the service plan relates to legal services, including land charges. The team's principal objective will continue to be that of providing high quality and timely dedicated legal advice to support the council's delivery of services and strategic projects, ensuring the council acts lawfully, transparently and ethically. And beyond that, the team will pursue a number of goals, including achieving good performance in terms of land charges, turnaround times, leading and managing, in partnership with IT, the council's approach to information governance, and delivering some IT improvements within the team to ensure a good customer service for internal and external customers. The rest of the service plan relates to service-wide or cross-cutting projects, which I'm happy to answer any questions on, along with anything else. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thoughts, observations? Simon Dew.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm probably being a bit dim about this. Point 13.1, page 106, move to 100% paperless process for door-to-door canvassing. I mean, that's nothing to do with political canvassing, presumably, because I will resist the temptation, the open goal that would seem to exist presented by the last general election, when one of the political parties, and obviously I shan't make any more specific remarks than that, delivered 20, I think, leaflets to one individual household. But this isn't in relation to political canvassing.
This is in relation to the council's duty to try and make sure that people who wish to be on the electoral register and wish to vote then have had the opportunity to do so. And it's moving from a position where paid members of staff, albeit on fixed-term contracts, will knock on doors holding bundles of paper, to a situation where those same people will knock on doors holding a safe and secure tablet, which reduces costs and actually makes that personal data that they're handling more secure.
I think it's worth saying that the word canvassing to politicians means something rather different. You might want to choose different words.
That's understood, but it is what it's known as. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I can understand why people want to push on electronic information, and I think that's fine for those who like it. But I certainly wouldn't like to have to read this on a machine. That's my personal view. And I think there should always be some possibilities of allowing paper to be given to people.
Can I just agree with that? I have to say, personally, I find reading long documents on a screen extremely difficult. And certainly from the chair, I'm not able to chair meetings using a machine. Whilst I acknowledge and accept that we need to go as electronic as we can, and a meeting this morning, for instance, I relied upon my electronic information. I didn't have any paper with me, but tonight it's rather different. So I think it's not quite as simple as just blanket saying we're not going to do anything other than electronic.
Absolutely right, Chairman. We would save far more money through better decision making than we can do by saving on the printing. For those of us who do read the papers, it's fine if people aren't going to read their papers. Don't send the paper copies to them.
Okay, I think we made our points on that. Robin, is there anything else you want to say? Do you want to come back on any of that?
Not unless you want me to, Chairman, no.
I think you've got the message. Right, let us move on then to commercial services. Kelvin.
Thank you, Chairman. Only one element of my service falls under the remit of this ONS, and that's building control. The overarching objective of building control is to offer a service that at the very least breaks even. We're doing this through two key approaches, and that's improving the efficiency of our processes and back office functions, and increasing our market share turnover with a focused business plan and set of KPIs over the next year.
Questions, observations? Simon?
I was just wondering if there's any information available about the level to which building control is conducted by the borough as opposed to private contractors.
Yeah, we have the information on market share. So at present, I believe we're just over 60% of the market.
The committee have already expressed some reservations concerning the challenge that you've got on the savings. I think you could take those as noted as a part of this as well. I think there's some concern about deleting ranger posts, the challenge to Waverley services and so on and so forth, and the overall challenge that you've got. Mr. Hyman, did you want to make one more comment?
Very quickly, thank you, Chairman. It's the last, I think, under this item, which is 116, the last two bits, which is identify the direction of travel for building control and training, but perhaps more difficult still, because that one's difficult because we are market dependent, and the private companies come in and out of the market as the market determines for their profitability, and we're left there holding the baby because someone's got to do it. 33.3, the very last one, identify additional new or existing skills to support the council's climate priority. And has somebody got an answer to that yet? Have we decided how we're doing that? Because I don't know what that means actually. Really, can someone explain that to me a little bit deeper? What we're going to be doing over the coming months?
Kelvin, do you want to answer?
I can attempt to, Chairman. That refers about the role that building control can have in achieving our climate emergency. So, for example, we're currently commenting on the future home standards and the abilities to sort of impact and sort of affect how homes are built in the borough.
Make the point about the climate change.
Yeah, and obviously, if you improve the sort of the building structure and of houses within the borough, that will have a positive impact on the climate emergency.
So the climate change is relating to building conditions.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we're talking about offset here and things that we don't understand and isn't entirely proven, or whether we're talking about it says additional new or existing skills. That's the question. What specifically in relation with what skills are we going to be going and getting? Are we paying for them, or have we just got to first of all work out what we need? Is that what this is saying? We've got to work out where we're deficient.
Quick reply, Kelvin.
I think it's the latter.
Okay, let's move on then. Thank you. We've made some comments on that. Finally, planning and economic development. Zach?
Thank you, Chairman. So planning and economic development covers the areas of development management, including enforcement, planning policy, including the preparation of local plans and neighbourhood planning, and economic development. The development management and planning policy areas were considered by the Environment ONS last Monday. So the only area tonight for consideration is the economic development side of things. And the outcomes set out on pages 117. Outcomes 20 to 27. I must admit I'm at a slight disadvantage in that the service plans were produced back in September, October, when I was not employed here as yet. And one of the glaring things, rather unusually, one of the things I would be saying is there's one glaring omission that I would like to introduce and will be putting forward is reviewing the economic development strategy. As members may know, the economic development strategy was produced in 2018, so it's reasonably recent. But as you'll know, there's been quite a few changes economically. We now have a clear understanding of what the impacts of, how Brexit is likely to come forward and the timescales for that. We have the climate change emergency, which has been declared, and we have ever-increasing retail pressures, particularly in terms of development of the high street. So one of the key actions that I believe should be on here and would be proposing to take forward to the executive would be to review the economic development strategy. At the moment, it just says that we'll be reporting on progress, but I think reviewing the economic development strategy is a key one. So I have been liaising with Councillor John Neal, who's the portfolio holder. He's fully supportive of that idea. Obviously, any update to the economic development strategy would be brought back to the ONS committees. The only other thing I'd like to say at this stage, and it's not a criticism of the work that's been done in terms of the service plan, but I think perhaps some of our outputs and actions could be rather more smart in terms of there being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-bound, and that's something that I'll be working on with my policy performance colleagues to ensure that we take forward something that's a bit more, I suppose, monitorable, if that's a word.
Zach, thank you. I think we would both, I'm sure the committee would welcome both of those points in terms of economic development and better indicators. That would be, I think, very welcome. Any other comments from members of the committee specific to economic development? Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is that I think the recommendation, I think we'll note the service plans, and we have identified a number of comments which can be included within our noting of that. Are we agreed on that? Okay, thank you. I didn't go, sorry, when I took item 6 and 7 together, I took a recommendation on item 6. I didn't take a recommendation on item 7. Again, could I go back to item 7? This is the report of the Budget Working Group. And could we just note the report? We made some observations, and could we thank the committee or thank the subcommittee for or the Budget Working Group for its work on that? Would that be okay as a recommendation? Mr. Hyman?
Well, I'm having difficulty because, I mean, we go along to the ONS training and you know, anybody with any sense we listen to says that we should not be bringing items to note in front of us. We should never have something here to note because that's a waste of our time. It could just be sent out on an email. Why are we wasting time discussing it? And yet we're constantly getting items. You know, do we note stuff? I'm just pointing out we've got a slight contradiction there.
Okay, that's noted. Sorry, this is something that we have seen in draft in the past. I think this is the final report. Maybe Mr. Elwood would just add, obviously we've all read it, but are there any other points, Mr. Elwood, that you would like to make to us? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the points I'd like to make, firstly, Councillor Hyman made a valid point that the report only considers the costs of the legal support and cost awards against the council. I'll be honest, as a new member of staff, I'm not aware of the actual officer costs in terms of the time taken in defending appeals, but I should imagine it's reasonably substantial element of our time. You're looking here at 78 appeals in the year 18 to 19, 66 appeals so far up to the date this report was written, albeit many of these, the vast majority, will be written representations, which in terms of householder applications and appeals would be just simply filling out the questionnaire and sending the officer's report. But where you get more complicated applications, appeals that go through informal hearings and public inquiries, there can be significant officer time. And I'm afraid I don't have the numbers to hand for tonight, but that's certainly something we should be looking into. I suppose the only other points I would make, if members have read the reports, are that we don't really have a control over the number of appeals we get, other than in making robust decisions, and the action points that are set out in section 4. Sorry, I've got the wrong bit here. The action points that are set out in sections 3.24 to 3.2 to 3.3 are focused on improving our decision-making processes, streamlining them and making them hopefully more effective, so that A, we reduce the number of appeals in total, but also that where there are appeals, that we're more robust in defending them and can hopefully avoid the substantial costs awards for unreasonable behaviour. I just want to point out then 3.9, the table talks about totals, but members, eagle-eyed members will have noticed that the total that's listed there is the total of the legal costs plus expert witness costs. It doesn't add on the costs awarded against Waverley Borough Council. So apologies, that should have been put in as a separate line. The only other points that I did raise when this was taken to the Environment ONS last week was that recently we've noticed that on informal hearings, which are supposed to be roundtable discussions between the parties to sort of agree those points that can be agreed and come to a reasoned debate on those matters that can't necessarily be agreed at the start. There's been a propensity recently here and other authorities in Surrey for appellants to bring along counsel, QCs, you know, at a rather substantial cost. I have had a number of members come to see me and raise concerns about that in terms of, you know, fighting fire with fire. We should be appointing counsel for informal hearings, but I would advise the ONS committee against that on the basis that informal hearings are supposed to be that a round-table discussion. The inspector dealing with an informal hearing should be making that point clear that we're not there to test witness evidence on oath. That's a matter for public inquiries, and that's why the most complex appeals are taken through a public inquiry route. So whilst there have been a number of councillors who've come to me and said they've witnessed informal hearings where the other parties have had external counsel, that would be an additional cost that we haven't budgeted for, and actually I think would be the wrong response, because if an appeal should be heard by a public inquiry, then that's the route it should be taken through the inspectorate. Having said that, if there is an informal hearing where there are matters of strategic importance that we must defend, then certainly we would consider that, and I would discuss that with my strategic director as to where it might be appropriate. But that's the only other thing that's not touched on really in the report that I'd like members to note and perhaps have some feedback on, if that's okay.
Thank you. Of course, this has been considered by the Environment Committee, as, which from the planning points of view, this is brought to us primarily from a value for money point of view, and therefore the costs. I'm prepared to move a little on that, but let's stick more to the costs and than going into the planning area. Councillor Deere, then I'll come to Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought this was a fascinating read, actually. 33% of the officers get it, inverted commas, wrong. More or less double that rate of the committee members seem to get it wrong. And I must say, I've heard some astonishing things said by members in planning committees. There is a mandatory, relatively brief mandatory amount of training that members are required to go through. I'd go as far as saying they should be required to pass an exam before they stand in this quasi-judicial position, and allow them to make more informed decisions on the basis of the planning regulations that exist and to which we are, if we are to save money and get value for money, abide by.
That's very interesting. Any other comments?
Well, thank you. Well, this is... Sorry, I beg your pardon. Jerry's first? Of course. Yeah.
Sorry, I was happy to... anyway, yes. I didn't completely, absolutely understand what Zach Elwood said in respect of the numbers didn't include the appeals. I mean, when I look at the box on page 126, I think that's what we're concentrating on really for a start. We've got the 2 years, one of them's year to date, so it's slightly yes, so we're talking about 80 appeals per annum. And obviously 80 appeals per annum, when you look at the total of 127,000 or whatever it happens to be, 100 grand plus, that goes no way, as he's said and hasn't had time to look at. I understand that. that doesn't include the costs of our staff, all of the support systems that are necessary. I'm just wondering whether anyone here has some idea of what it costs per appeal in staff time, so that we've got a ballpark figure, because that 127 could, for all I know, change to 1 million, or it might change to double what it is. I'd like a ballpark in there. This is the cost of one appeal, I think, and last year, and 2 appeals in the current year, of a few £1,000s. I'm not sure where that doesn't include the something, but I want a total amount. And actually, then what I'd like to know is what's that total amount not including Eastern? Because all of the costs that we have, the entire cost, whether it's 200,000 or whether it's a million or 2, all of those, except for Eastern, could be avoided and could have been avoided for the past 15 years if we implemented habitats lawfully, when we've had the MPPG out, and that's the third bullet point from the bottom on page 31 of our corporate priorities, which we really should be implementing. So we have an easy way of saving ourselves masses of money here, which I'm sure, as we're meant to be doing this for residents, they would support. But I'd like to know what sort of amount of money it is.
Thank you. We'll come to that. But I think in terms of what Zach said, in that table, the costs awarded against Waverley are not included. So the 127,716 should have 1,500 added to it to make it, whatever that is, 129,000. And then the 120,410 needs to have the 56,000 added to that to make a total of 176 or 170. Sorry, where are we? 174,000 pounds in total. So that's the clarification on that particular point. Mr. Nicholson, then I'll come to Mr. Cole.
Thank you. Just 2 very brief points. One is it's a quite fascinating document, as Councillor Dear said. It's interesting how Central have such a good record, 30%, and Godalming area, and yet others are 65, 60%. Very interesting. Something not really to do with this committee, but I'm just absolutely fascinated about this. We're talking about revising the scheme of delegation, and I tend to hear sort of truncated mutterings about this, and we don't seem to get, I haven't heard very much about it. I know it has to be, we can't have any specific details at present because it has to go through standards and then it has to go to council. I would be interested in just sort of a general philosophy to see which way we might be going in changes of planning committees and planning considerations. Is it possible for that to be answered in a very general way?
I will come to that, but of course that will be a matter of fierce debate with councillors, I'm sure, when it comes to it. Mr. Cole?
Couple of points. First, Councillor Hyman, we can save a lot of money here. We can agree all the applications we get, that we save all the money on appeals. That's obviously not the solution. So they have to find a balance here between implementing what we think is the best thing for determining applications locally, with the fact, in the end, some of these are going to get overturned. We can't go to a position where we just agree everything in order to save money. So we have to accept that money will be spent on defending appeals. Clearly, we want to avoid points where we make big mistakes and we get cost against us because we've just done it incorrectly, which is, but I don't think we have to accept costs will be incurred. On the second point, I have to agree with Councillor Dear that of the recommendations, only one really points at members. Most of it's to do with officers, and I agree with him that better training or better guidance, perhaps, or better just telling them what to do is required in order to avoid mistakes being made. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Before I come to Zach, I mean, if we go to page 129, which has got a series of suggested improvements, I think most of us surely would be pretty happy with most of those in terms of better training, although I'm not sure we do want to go to examinations, as Mr. Dear suggests. Better analysis on the 3.25, and it's very interesting to see the analysis that we have got, and I think it's very interesting to see that analysis, and it needs to be fed back to individual planning committees. I'm sure it will be. Revisions in 3.26 to the pre-application advice process. I'm sure that ward members would much prefer to be involved at an early point rather than being surprised at a late point. That's a good recommendation. 3.27 on planning committee structures. I think that's highly controversial, I'm sure that officers will have some views, but I'm sure that members will have views, and the idea that individual ward members will be taken further away from decision making may be a source of concern. More effective training of committee members, I'm sure that we would be happy with that. The scheme of delegation on 3.29 over the page, clarity perhaps to be given to members on that process. The vast number of applications are considered by officers alone. There are times when it's quite difficult when we glance through planning applications to pick out where the problem areas are. And I think some perhaps officers may need to draw members' attention, even though they want an easier ride, to potential problems. 3.30, the improvement of committee reports with clarity and shorter reports, I'm sure would be welcomed by most people. And then I think the local plan judicial review, I think as I understand it, if going back to the table, the amount of money we spend on appeals, am I right to understand that we don't have a budget? So we're spending £174,000 this year on awards and appeals, but there is no budget for that. Is that correct? Or do we have a budget and we're greatly exceeding it?
We do have a budget, and when we exceed it, we have to come to the executive for a supplementary estimate.
So how much are we exceeding the budget by this year to date?
Don't have that in my head, Chairman, but I can certainly drop a note around.
If we take in terms of the 174,000 a year to this year, I mean, that's getting on for the equivalent to 2% of council tax. It's quite a substantial sum of money.
Yes, Chair, and one of the things about costs awards for unreasonable behaviour is, again, it's very difficult to predict, and particularly for some meaty public inquiries, those costs could be substantial. It's not unusual for councils to face cost awards in the six figures, 150, 250,000 on certain sites. I mean, we've been fortunate not to have those sorts of awards against us in recent years, but it is something to bear in mind, and that's why it is important we do address this issue and do what we can in terms of taking this forward. In terms of the particular points, yes, I mean, reviewing the planning committee structures will be looked at as part of the wider governance review across the whole council. I don't think it would necessarily be helpful to go into that in detail now, and I think it could start lots of discussions, but certainly part of that is looking at ways of reducing resource time and the cost of producing agendas. But obviously, it is, as it says there, it needs to look at changes to the committee structure need to be considered fully by the appropriate bodies as part of the governance review. Delegation scheme, I mean, there's some small quick wins potentially there at the moment. There are certain things like if there's a relative of an officer, for instance, that puts in an application who's an agent, that automatically goes to a committee. There might be I mean, it's massive for the standards committee, but there may be a better way that, say, the portfolio holder or the chair of a committee could potentially look at those applications rather than having to be a full report that goes to a committee. And obviously, the more focused committee reports at the moment, obviously, I've come into the authority. I've got my own ideas about making changes to reports to make them more effective, more efficient. But obviously, I need to sort of take that through. I just wanted to point out on the judicial review, that although the cost, £105,000 spent to date, so this is 3.31, sorry, Chairman, something I forgot to mention in my introduction was that although the cost there are 105,664, quoted in 3.31, we have already received £20,000 back in terms of costs that we claimed from CPRE Surrey, and we are currently in communication with the Protect Our Waverley campaign, legal representatives, regarding the £30,000 that's actually due from them in terms of the High Court and Court of Appeal costs, which, as you know, were capped at £30,000.
Mr. Hess, you want to come back with a quick point?
Yeah, my quick point is, while we all no doubt agree that these appeal costs should be reduced, it would be helpful members who sit on these planning committees, work hard, try to understand these schemes. If the drawings were better, the definition on those drawings were better, and the planning website was faster and better, and not like it is now, because we are being disadvantaged and very often not provided with all the information we should have. Dimensions aren't provided, sight lines aren't provided, and it's very difficult for members on the planning committees always to make the right decisions based on the information given. So there need to be some real step change improvements. Thank you.
Further, if it's a quick point, Jerome.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, right. Appeals, yes, perhaps we do have a lot of appeals, probably not too many, but we don't get enough information. I know there's a vast amount of planning applications going through the council, which is a tremendous strain on the officers. And when they go down to the councillors don't have time to really look very closely at them all, and frequently there isn't sufficient information on there, and we either have to go back or cross our fingers and hope we've done the right thing. So it really needs to be a bit more spread out. You know, we're getting things one day and we have to agree that day or the next day or something, and we really haven't got the time to do that properly. I would like to see planning more regularised, because at the moment it's just one mad rush. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I suggest from the chair that we thank officers for their report, that we continue to register concern at the high level of planning appeal and other costs, that we broadly accept the suggested improvements, although we have some concern about the planning committee restructuring, and that we also register some concern on the planning IT system, and I think that's probably a reasonable point, a reasonable summing up. Are we happy that we would accept that as our recommendation? Okay, fine, thank you. Get this meeting complete by 9:30. But if we can move to agenda item 10, which is the capital strategy, the treasury management and the property investment strategy. This will be, I think, introduced. Well, I'm presuming that members have read the report. I won't be commenting on the property investment strategy, although I will continue in the chair. Mr. Vickers, Peter, do you want to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The capital strategy is a suite of documents or policies and strategies that provides the governance framework for the council's cash management and its capital investment activity. So members are being asked on this one to make observations to the executive. So the capital strategy is in Annex 1 to this report, and it provides a pictorial view of the whole suite of documents, just so you can get your head around which documents are which. There are quite a few in the pack. The capital strategy itself is Appendix 2, and this is the overarching governance document setting out the minimum considerations and procedures that must be followed for any transactions that fall under the capital remit. There's a statutory requirement for the council to adopt the capital strategy every year. It's a SIPF requirement. The management of the council's cash flow, banking, money market deposits, including our borrowing strategy and the statutory minimum revenue provision that we must apply if we have negative capital financing requirement, are all contained within the treasury management strategy. It's quite a technical document in some areas. I don't intend to get into that level tonight. So just walking you through the key documents, we start with the treasury management policy, which is Annex 3, and this just sets out the high-level objectives for treasury management, followed by the treasury management statement, which is Annex 4, which sets out the detailed criteria for applying the policy. And there aren't any changes to these two documents. Treasury Management Strategy for 2021, which is Annex 5. This sets out the detailed operational criteria and the boundaries to manage risk around the treasury management activity. The only change to this document is the non-specified investment limit. So in plain English, it's the ability to invest for longer than 1 year. This has been, for any particular investment, sorry. So this has been increased from 20 million to 30 million, just to provide us with some more headroom to achieve some higher rates as the market, the interest yield on the market stretches out a little bit further. The final document in the suite is the prudential indicator, which is Annex 6. This effectively provides the detailed operational boundaries and the framework for officers on a day-to-day basis, managing the treasury function. The indicators reflecting the borrowing and the interest costs that have been adjusted to incorporate the property investment target, where we intend to finance investments through borrowing. So you can see there's an additional 100 million in the general fund elements of those prudential indicators. So alongside the treasury management function, the council also invests in property, which we've discussed at some length earlier on, to generate income supporting the corporate strategy. So the property investment income and property investments as a whole are governed by the property investment strategy, and that's Annex 7 to this report. So the VFM committee has also done a significant amount of work in previous years on developing the property investment strategy, and this year it's been refined to cover investments in residential development, which is the key change to that. The governance arrangements also been enhanced to incorporate legal advice on investing and our borrowing powers. Also some enhanced exit strategy triggers, and we've also incorporated some detail around the climate emergency considerations. A full summary of all the changes is actually on page 181. I'll not itemise them all. I assume people have read them. And that's as far as I tend to go, Chairman, introducing this.
Thank you. Could I suggest that we take this in 2 items? Could we first of all consider the Treasury management side and not discuss the property investment strategy? We'll come to that in a second. So on the capital strategy other than Annex 7, other than the property investment strategy, has the committee any points to make on that? Mr. Nicholson.
2 points I think which are important. First of all, the policy is to give security a higher priority than rate of return in yields, and I think that's important. And the preference for fixed rate investments with budget certainty. I think these 2 things are important.
Mr. Hyman?
Just, I think really for the benefit of newer members of the council and of the committee, for a little bit of background where we came from, when all of this went through, I'm talking about the Treasury management practices, the plan and practices, the TMPs. On page 155, for instance, we've got TMP4, which was something I was particularly concerned about, and 1 or 2 others were as well, where, for instance, it's the 3rd paragraph down on the page, the 2nd paragraph under TMP4 said, should Waverley decide in future use derivative instruments for the management of risks. And, you know, there's a lot of concern in respect, obviously, of using derivatives and the risks of them. And also, furthermore, the issue of borrowing to invest, which we'll touch upon, I think, next. I always urge us to be extremely careful and not to allow there to be anything in any, certainly in any delegations to officers to use such instruments without it coming to us and without certainly some a proper decision-making process.
Okay, thank you. Then could we just have a comment from Peter on the fixed rates, the point that Mr. Nicholson made, and then derivatives, and then I think the principle of borrowing to invest.
Thank you, Chairman. So all of our money market transactions are fixed rate, fixed term deposits. We don't invest in any other forms of, as Jerry says, derivatives. So that gives us security, which is our top priority, and yield is actually last. And obviously liquidity is very important to this authority. We have to pay our cash flows as they fall due, and we do a great amount of work actually to ensure we're accurate on our cash flow forecasting. It is an art more than a science to some degree. Just picking up on the derivatives issue, so we don't use derivatives as a rule. The sentence actually says, should Waverley decide in future to use derivative instruments for the management of these risks, these will be limited to those set out in the annual Treasury Management Strategy. Well, if you go to that strategy, there is no mention of us using any derivatives in there, purely because at this point in time, we don't intend to. If that ever changed in future, then we would be coming back to full council explaining what the derivative is we wish to use, the reason for using it, and what the implications are, so what the risks are. So that's something that's probably a very, very long way in the future as far as Waverley managing its treasury. With regard to borrowing, borrowing is is very much a normal course of business for any organisation. It's something we have to do responsibly. The Treasury Management Strategy picks up on all the key issues that we have to consider as far as borrowing is concerned, and they are incorporated in this document, and we will always operate within the boundaries of what's in this document, Chairman.
Thank you. So I think we're probably fairly relaxed on the Treasury Management side. Councillor Merryweather, do you want to just then make any further points on the property investment strategy before we discuss that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, nothing in particular. It's a strategy document. It's not a handbook. It's not a thesis. It's not a dissertation. It's a very high-level statement of principles, which takes the principles that were already established for commercial property that we've already invested in and extends them where necessary to residential property. And it also takes into account some of the feedback that we've had from our advisors who gave the Property Investment Advisory Board a very useful workshop before we finalise this document. And I'm quite pleased to say that they thought that it was a good document, a sound document, and that was very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments? Mr. Deere.
Thank you, Chairman. Clearly the surplus, the yet to be achieved surplus as a result of the property investment strategy is a central part of being able to continue to balance the budget. And I have to say, given the self-imposed restrictions that I understand the Property Investment Advisory Board have placed upon the properties which are they are prepared to consider, I foresee a really difficult situation arising out of all this. There clearly are the financial obligations arising out of borrowing public money from the Public Works Loan Board, and the margin that I believe has, as a statutory obligation, has to be added to that as an amortisation of the capital cost of the loan over the period of the borrowing. And then a margin to make it worthwhile and generate an income, that the council can retain. I think limiting it in the way I understand has been the case is going to make that extremely difficult. I hope to sit down with a portfolio holder at some point, and we've sort of penciled in a coffee at some point to have a chat about this. But I think on the present setup is going to make the sort of figures that I've heard this evening be extremely difficult. I also think that ventures into residential property are that would be an extremely courageous decision, as Sir Humphrey might have put it. Extremely courageous. There are all sorts. I own commercial property and residential property. Virtually all of the problems come out of residential. You have to deal with voids. You have to deal with tenants not paying rent, even if even if it's not void. There is a far higher rate of maintenance and repair that is involved, all of which nets down the income that the council will receive. And I think residential property is a very bold choice, if I may say.
Thank you. Any other comments, Mr. Hyman?
It's back to the question that I've been asking for quite a long time, but to the last administration as well, which is how much money are we really making on our property investment strategy? And I'm not talking about the historic ones, where I know we get quite a good income from things we've held for since the 1980s, things we inherited in actual fact, I believe. But the things which we have invested in, let's say ourselves, over the past 4 years or whatever it is, when we take consideration of the costs, the real costs, staffing, the expertise that we have to call in, the legal advice, setting up all the, any organisations and committees that need to be set up. When we take into consideration all those costs, how much have we made, and what actually is the net? How much are we really making out of this? What's the profit? Because I absolutely agree with Councillor Deere, except for his concerns that the problems always lie in the residential. We've also got problems with letting of commercial properties, so we don't only have that problem with residential. And I do think that the idea of borrowing to invest to a lot of our residents, that's borrowing to gamble, and it's unethical, immoral and foolhardy as far as a lot of our residents are concerned, and we have to bear in mind that we serve them. Thanks.
That's an extreme statement that you've just made, Mr. Hyman. Are members of the committee in agreement that, or would they disagree with that statement, that it's immoral?
No, that some of our residents think. Sorry, that some of our residents think that borrowing to invest is borrowing on property markets is borrowing to gamble, and that they think that it's unethical, particularly people of a more religious, immoral and foolhardy, and have done for a long time. There's a very old saying, never a borrower lender will borrow to me, or something, isn't there? We ignore that completely.
It sounds as if you're veering towards supporting that view, and I think that needs to be, you need to be very careful in that, with those statements. Any other comments from the committee? Officers, do you want to make a reply to any of the points, or are you relaxed with what we've just said? Graham?
So far we haven't borrowed, and therefore we haven't carried the that extra cost, but we will have to. There's some scope, going back to the budget report earlier. You can see from the reserve statement there is some scope for making the next acquisition without resorting to borrowing, and that will, that is why I've made some sort of positive statements about the targets set in next year's budget. But certainly beyond that, it will be extremely challenging, and I hear members' comments around borrowing, and the government can, at very short notice, as they did recently, put up the cost of borrowing. There is an alternative now. There's the LGA's bond agency, and they've just made their first lend to a local authority, so that might be an emerging alternative source. But opportunities will arise, but it is a target in our financial plan that carries risk, as I explained in the budget report. But we are looking for opportunities. Coming back, I mean, I can't give you exact costs of officer time and running costs. If it's something the committee want to explore in more detail in the future, certainly we can do a little project on that and bring some more information back. I think Councillor Hine was asking about sort of the true costs. I mean, the cost of acquisitions we always present as part of the business case. So cost of stamp duty, costs of agents' fees, legal fees, etc. We'll always put that into the mix at the point of decision. And the ongoing cost thereafter is about the cost of managing property. And we have a team that have been doing that for years. Unless we take on a particularly high maintenance in terms of high management property, then we can generally absorb that within that team. But it's always got to be kept under review. So it is an area that we're paying a lot of attention to at the moment, and we have the Property Investment Advisory Board, the panel of members that supports that process. And as opportunities come up to either look at our own property and our own assets or to acquire new ones, be it residential or commercial, we will continue that flow with the Property Investment Board. And hopefully, Chairman, we will be able to meet the targets under this, this strategy.
Thank you. Mr. Hess, quickly.
Well, reference to residential property investments. I don't know where all these residential properties are, but it strikes me living in Surrey that unless you can buy at incredibly good value or below market, the sort of costs of housing in Surrey doesn't generate a very good return. So why not plough some money into a publicly owned site like Coxbridge Farm, which is owned by the community, aka Surrey County Council, do a joint venture with them, build low-cost, affordable housing without a developer or housing association, take out the profit margin, and generate real, genuine, low-cost housing for the community, for key workers, low-income groups. And they will appreciate that, and if they're looked after, there'll be good tenants, and you won't have voids or unpaid rents, hopefully. But that's my concept, rather than chasing after high-valued Surrey properties which won't give you a good return, and you pay stamp duty on those, whereas if you build, you don't.
Thank you. Councillor Merryweather, do you want to just give a brief response to some of the concerns here?
Yeah, well, no one says it's going to be easy, and I think it's a tough target, and who knows if we're going to hit it or not. But the point is, at the moment, we live in a world where our central government financing characteristics and our residents, we've just had a residents' budgetary consultation with them, and top of their list was for us to go out and explore commercial opportunities. And this is the only one that we've got at the moment that gives us a hope of filling our budgetary gap. Why would we not want to explore it? The purpose of this document that we're talking about to bring us back in the room is to make sure that we do it effectively, efficiently, and responsibly. I just want to come back on a couple of other points Councillor Deere made. The real restrictions aren't self-imposed. I'm afraid they're imposed by the government. What we can do, what we can invest in, how much we can borrow. These are some of the issues that we've been struggling just to get to the point where we are, particularly when it comes to residential property. Part of the reason for going for residential property is to balance the risks. We are fully invested at the moment in commercial property, particularly in the Farnham area, and we're very susceptible to voids there, as anyone who's looked at Waycourt East recently will recognise. Our only advantage, I think, in terms of the returns, is that we already own land. The biggest single cost is land. We own land, and our best hope for getting the returns that we need to make this work is to develop on the land that we already own, not go out and assemble land, not for us, not for property developers, not for anybody else, but to find land that we own, that we can build on, and get the profitability in there. In terms of doing projects, low housing projects, we have social housing. We have thousands of houses. The idea of doing something at Coxbridge or whatever, social housing, yes, for sure, but that is not what this strategy is about. We have to multitask, and this task is not part of the housing revenue account activity. We're a landlord, we do have skill sets, but we will have to bring in skills from outside, and we've already discussed that. Thank you.
From the Chair, could I suggest then that we say the following, that we broadly accept the capital strategy. However, some members expressed considerable concerns over the movement into residential property within the property investment strategy, and others questioned the ability of the council to ensure good returns. Would that be a reasonably accurate point, Councillor Deere?
Thank you. I mean, broadly, yes. But I'd just like to reply to the point that Mark made. The self-imposed restriction, I think the most relevant one there is to invest solely within the borough, which last I heard was the strategy. I mean, investing in property is all about regional, the management of risk by involving yourself in different parts of the world with different sorts of companies and all the rest of it, all of whom should be, you know, demonstrably reliable. But limiting yourself to the relatively small pool of Waverley is a fundamental drawback, as I see, from an investment strategy point of view for this council. Philosophically, how lovely it might be, but practically.
If I may, that is a government restriction. We have to operate within the law, and the further away we get from our borough or our economic impact zone, the harder it is for us legally to invest in residential property, because we are getting further detached from our corporate strategy. That's the legal advice that we have. Yeah.
Thank you. We could debate this for a lot longer, but I think if we can go back to my proposal that we broadly accept the capital strategy, we've expressed some concerns on the property investment strategy, and of course I'm sure that the portfolio holder will note the other comments that have been made. Would members be happy with that as a proposition? Okay, thank you. Let's agree with that. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, agenda item 11. Yasmin, do you want to take us through this?
Thank you, Chairman. So on page 183 begins the work programme for this committee. If you were able to attend the ONS training, you'll remember the suggestion of the trainer to bring the work programme to the beginning of the meeting. So you'll be seeing that from now on in future agendas. This item will be first. Section A of the work programme contains the outcomes of the committee, as always, and the progress made against them. As I said previously, grey means that the action or recommendation has been completed and it will be removed on the next version of the work programme, so they won't be included in there next time. We can't have them on every single one. Section B. So I've been making notes as the meeting's gone on, and I've picked up the interest of the committee in ensuring the progress of the savings under business transformation are kept under a close eye of this committee. And as Zach Elwood suggested, there will be an economic development strategy review. This committee played an active role in that development of that strategy, and I think that would be a suitable thing for this committee to have on its work programme if it so wished. You can see from the work programme we've got a few items in March already: workforce profile, an introduction to SIL, and as always the corporate performance report, and a possible item on budget strategy working group. So those are the items we've got at the moment. The action plan from the economic development strategy, that may need to change, if the committee is agreeable, to change into the review of the economic development strategy, depending on timing. So if Zach was suggesting that that review would take place early on in the year, it might make more sense to, rather than looking at the action plan, it might make more sense to look at the strategy when it's ready, rather than looking at the action plan and then immediately having the review of the strategy. And this committee also has shown interest in looking at the, as we've discussed already, the car parking review, the outcomes of that. And I've been talking to Richard Homewood, and the consultants will produce a report containing proposals on the long-term charging, some long-term charging proposals. And speaking to Richard, it could be that that report comes before the committee for its observations in March 2020. But as always, I'll stay up to date with the head of service to work out when the most appropriate time would be to have that on the committee's work programme. There's nothing else from me, Chairman, unless there are any suggestions from members to add anything to the work programme. Thank you.
Thank you. I will obviously continue to work with Yasmin on that, along with the Vice Chairman. Are there any other points that anybody wants to add? Or are you happy to leave that with me and the Vice Chairman as we go forward? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we've considered that. That concludes the meeting. Can I just apologise for a very long meeting? We had a lot to get through. The budget was clearly an important part of our considerations. Thank you for your forbearance. Thank you. Meeting closed.